For as long as most of us can remember, one name has pretty much meant trust, care, and family. But what if that entire foundation was built on secrets? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the biggest corporations on the planet and some of the dark secrets they've allegedly been keeping. So, where are we getting all this from? Our guide for this whole deep dive is the book No More Tears: The Dark Secrets of Johnson & Johnson. It was written by Gardiner Harris, a former reporter for the New York Times, and believe me, it is a very in-depth look at the legal battles and, really, the huge ethical questions that swirl around this company we all think we know. Okay, so at the very core of this company is its famous credo. This thing was written way back in 1943, and it's not just some mission statement buried on a website. It's literally etched in stone at their headquarters. It promises that Johnson & Johnson will always put people before profits. I mean, that's a powerful statement, right? A promise that, well, let's just say it's going to be tested. And that right there, that's the central question of this entire explainer. What happens when the company you trust, the image you see on TV, doesn't match up with what's actually happening behind the scenes? All right, so before we get into the heavy stuff, we really have to get our heads around just how massive and, well, beloved the public image of Johnson & Johnson is. It's not just a company. People have called it the quintessential American story. I mean, just think about your own life, right? A scraped knee, you grab a Band-Aid. A headache, you reach for Tylenol. These products are they're part of our lives. They're woven into the fabric of our homes. We're talking about some of the most trusted brands on the entire planet. And look, this isn't just a warm and fuzzy feeling. The numbers are staggering. Their reputation was bulletproof. For 10 straight years, they were #1 on Fortune's Pharma list. They had a AAA credit rating, one of only 2 corporations with that rating, by the way. They were seen as the absolute gold standard of corporate ethics. Okay, so we've established that glowing reputation. Now, let's talk about the other side of the coin. Because the book argues there's this huge, massive gap between that pristine public face and what was really going on behind closed doors. This quote really nails the whole argument of the book. It's about this massive clash, right? On one hand, you have the public perception of J&J as this super safe, super ethical company. On the other hand, you have these allegations of unethical and, yeah, sometimes even criminal behavior. So where do we even begin with this disconnect? Well, let's start with the one product that's probably most responsible for that wholesome, trusted image, Johnson's baby powder. To get what's going on here, you need to know a little bit of science. It's pretty simple, actually. Talc, the main ingredient in baby powder, and asbestos, they're like mineral twins. Geologically, they hang out together in the earth. That means when you mine for talc, it's super hard not to get some asbestos mixed in. And here's the real kicker. According to the book, this wasn't some new discovery. Johnson & Johnson allegedly knew about this potential problem for decades. We're talking as far back as 1958, when a lab straight up told them their talc had asbestos in it. And by 1973, one of their own research directors basically said, yeah, we can't pretend our minds are clean anymore. This slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? The difference between what they said and what they knew. Publicly, in 1971, they're saying 0 asbestos, flat out. But privately, in a memo to the FDA that same year, they admit that talc contains less than 1%, if any, asbestos particles. A very different story. You know, it's easy to get lost in memos and percentages, but we have to remember, behind all of this are real people. The book shares these heartbreaking stories, like the story of Tony Roberts. She was a lifelong loyal customer, and her story, and so many others just like it, they became the human face of these massive legal battles. But here's the thing. This story doesn't end with baby powder. Not even close. The book makes it clear this wasn't just a one-off problem. Now we're going to shift gears to their pharmaceutical side and talk about a drug called risperidol. $2.2 billion. Just let that number sink in. That's what Johnson & Johnson agreed to pay back in 2013 to settle a whole bunch of allegations about risperidol. At the time, it was one of the biggest healthcare fraud settlements in American history. Just massive. So what was all that money for? Well, the Department of Justice laid out some pretty serious claims. They alleged J&J was illegally marketing risperidol to people it wasn't approved for, like kids and the elderly. They said the company downplayed major health risks and even paid kickbacks to doctors to get them to prescribe it more. And just like with the baby powder, there's a human cost here. The author tells this story about a J&J sales rep he met.
Her own 10-year-old nephew was prescribed Risperdal off-label, and he gained 25 pounds. He was too embarrassed to even go swimming with her. It's just a small story, but it really shows you the real-world impact of these alleged marketing schemes.
Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? How does a company with all these skeletons in the closet manage to keep such a squeaky clean reputation for so long? Well, the book argues it wasn't by accident. It was a very deliberate, very aggressive strategy to protect their public image at all costs. Get this. Internally, J&J's baby products had a nickname. They were called the Golden Egg. And why? Because that feeling you get, that trust from the baby fresh scent in the no more tears promise, that created this kind of protective halo over the entire company. It was priceless, and they allegedly would do anything to protect it. So what did protecting it look like? Well, according to the book, it was pretty intense. We're talking about threatening media outlets with pulling their ad money if they ran negative stories. We're talking about hiring consultants to go after scientists whose research they didn't like. And maybe most shockingly, adopting a test for their talc that was supposedly designed not to find asbestos. Think about that. When you hear about tactics like these, it just makes you think bigger, doesn't it? It stops being about just one company and starts being about corporate power itself, about accountability. How do we make sure this kind of thing doesn't just happen over and over again? So what's the solution? The author of No More Tears does offer some ideas for big systemic changes. Two of the big ones are, first, actually punishing executives who lie to regulators like the FDA, and second, stopping drug companies from paying for doctors' continuing education, because you can imagine that creates a huge conflict of interest. And really, that leaves us with this one big question to think about. For a company whose entire brand, its entire identity is built on trust, what happens when that trust is broken? The story of Johnson & Johnson is this incredible cautionary tale about the huge gap that can exist between a company's image and its reality. And it forces us all to ask, who's really looking out for us?